What if the biggest obstacle standing between you and the life you want isn't a mindset, a goal, or even a bad decision, but a doorway? And not metaphorically, a literal doorway. The one you pass through every morning without noticing. The one that quietly greets your opportunities or shuts them out before they even have a chance to knock. Here's a truth most people overlook. Your front door doesn't just open into your home, it opens into your future. It's the first boundary between your private world and the outside energy that wants to enter. And depending on how it's designed, lit, cared for, or ignored, that doorway may be the single most powerful and most underestimated force shaping your luck, finance, and peace of mind. This isn't about superstition, it's about structure. It's about the way your space either supports you or silently holds you back. If you've ever felt stuck even when you're doing everything right, if you've ever walked into a house and instantly sensed whether it was calm, chaotic, or welcoming, you already know how real this is. Energy doesn't wait for your permission. It flows where you've made space or where you haven't. In this video, we'll uncover the 5 most overlooked front door elements that could be either quietly protecting your prosperity or slowly draining it day after day and unnoticed. And more importantly, I'll show you simple, practical shifts that can open the flow again, not just in your home, but in your life. Because your front door isn't just an entrance, it's a mirror of your boundaries, your energy, and your readiness to receive. And if it's misaligned, every other effort, affirmations, rituals, even ambition might be fighting upstream. So let's take a closer look at this forgotten space. Because the doorway to your next chapter, it might be the one you've already walked through 1,000 times without ever really seeing it. The name of the house, awakening the spirit of the home. Most people name their children, some even name their cars, yet the very space that holds our deepest thoughts, shelters our quietest moments, and protects us from the chaos of the world outside, remains nameless. Why is it that something so constant, so intimate, is rarely acknowledged in such a personal way? It's almost as if we've gotten used to treating our homes like just another possession. 4 walls, a roof, and a to-do list. But in Feng Shui and in the lived experience of thousands who've transformed their spaces, the home is not just a structure. It's an energy being, receptive, and capable of reflecting back to you whatever emotion, respect, or neglect you pour into it. And naming it is more than symbolic. It's a small, quiet declaration. This place matters to me. What many people don't realize is that the moment you give your home a name, you create an energetic bond. It's a silent agreement between you and the space that you're no longer just occupying it, you're in relationship with it. Just like we tend to treat people more thoughtfully when we know their names, we subconsciously behave more mindfully towards spaces that feel alive in our minds. That subtle shift from the house to Bright Haven or Stillwater Place doesn't just sound poetic. It shifts how you care, how you clean, how you walk through the doorway, and how you feel when you return at the end of a long day. The name acts like a gentle tether to presence, a reminder that this is not just where you live, it's where your story is unfolding. From the perspective of environmental psychology, this naming practice taps into something far deeper than decor. When we assign identity to a space, we increase our sense of emotional ownership, which in turn influences our behaviors. We become more likely to nurture that space, respect it, and, without even realizing it, design it to mirror our highest aspirations. It's not about luxury, it's about intimacy. And sometimes intimacy begins with something as simple as a name. But here's where the thinking might need to be flipped. Most people assume naming a home has to sound elegant or dramatic. They hesitate, thinking it needs to be profound or spiritual. But what if the real power lies in its honesty? What if the best name for your home is the one that simply reflects how you want to feel when you step inside? What if the real question isn't, what should I call this place? But rather, what feeling do I want this space to give me every single day? That's where your answer lives. Maybe it's safe harbor, maybe it's quiet bloom, maybe it's just homecoming. You don't have to choose what sounds impressive. You choose what feels grounding. And the beauty is, this one act often becomes the beginning of a cascade. When a viewer once renamed her apartment Little Light, she noticed something subtle yet powerful. She started cleaning more gently, adding fresh flowers on the weekend, and setting a boundary not to bring unresolved stress through the door. Her life didn't transform overnight, but her relationship to her space did. And that, in turn, changed the tone of her days. Because the name became more than a word. It became a small compass, gently steering her back to what mattered most when things felt overwhelming. So ask yourself, if your home had a voice, what would it want to be called? If your space were your friend, how would it want to be remembered? Because in the end, this isn't about branding your house. It's about aligning your environment with your intention. It's about letting your space be more than silent support and instead allowing it to be an ally, the kind that quietly reminds you of who you're becoming. And once that name is chosen, once it's spoken, whispered, or even written down in a journal, it creates a thread of continuity. Every time you walk through your front door, you're not just entering a physical space. You're stepping into a story that has been claimed, cherished, and consciously named. And that changes everything. 2. The shape and strength of the front door. You can't build a powerful life with a weak entrance. And yet, that's exactly what most people unknowingly do. The front door is often treated as nothing more than a design choice or a convenience feature, painted to match the trim, installed to fit a budget, passed through without thought. But in Feng Shui and structural psychology alike, the front door is far more than just wooden hinges. It is the energetic mouth of the home, the very place where external flow becomes internal experience. And if the first boundary of your space is unstable, misaligned, or damaged, what kind of message does that send about what you're willing to allow into your life? Or what you're too exhausted to protect? The door is the threshold between what you've built for yourself and what the world brings to your feet. And every time it creaks off center, catches on a warped frame, or barely opens wide enough to let a guest feel welcome, it tells a story, not just to others, but to your own subconscious. A dented door quietly affirms a dented sense of safety. A door too small compresses your energy before you even step out into the day. And a door too large for the home it belongs to allows that energy to scatter. No anchor, no direction, just a steady leak like trying to hold water in a broken bowl. Have you ever walked into a space and immediately felt tension, as if the walls were squeezing your breath? Or walked through a grand, oversized door only to feel oddly exposed, like the house was trying to impress, but forgot how to protect? That reaction isn't random. It's your body responding to spatial messages. The front door delivers the very first of these messages, not just to visitors, but to your own energy field every time you leave and return. So if that entryway is compromised, so is the flow of stability, momentum, and clarity. The mistake people often make isn't in the color or decoration, but in underestimating the psychological weight a misaligned door creates. In Feng Shui, a crooked hinge, or a door that scrapes against the floor, is more than an annoyance. It's a symbol of resistance, life not quite opening the way it should. And if you're constantly pushing against something to enter or leave your home, it may reflect how effortful your external life feels too, because your space echoes your reality. A blocked path at the door often mirrors blocked conversations, stagnant career energy, or friction in family dynamics. But let's shift the perspective. Instead of thinking of the door as an object, what if we saw it as a contract? A subtle physical agreement between your inner world and the outside one. When that contract is clean, strong, and intentional, you send a clear message to the universe. I know my boundary. I know what I allow. I know what I deserve. But when that contract is fragile, when the door hangs weakly on squeaky hinges or swings unevenly, it tells a different story. One where you're not quite sure what you're holding in or what you're letting in. This might sound like a small detail, but it often becomes the silent anchor for larger patterns. A family with a stuck front door might struggle to open up to each other. A home with a back door that's more used than the front may experience inverted energy, where outside obligations take over internal priorities. A house with a broken frame at the threshold might feel, over time, like the people inside it are constantly off balance, uncertain, unrooted, or always needing to fix one more thing before they can truly relax. So ask yourself not just how your front door looks, but how it feels. Does it support you or strain you? Does it open smoothly like a breath in alignment? Or does it resist, just slightly, reminding you of something unresolved every time it moves? This is not about luxury or aesthetics. It's about function as symbolism. A door that fits well, closes with intention, and aligns with the frame it's in, sets the tone for a life that also feels well-fitted, purposeful, and aligned. If your door has become invisible to you, there's a chance that parts of your personal energy field have too. Because the doorway is not only a passage, it's a mirror. When reinforced and respected, it becomes the strongest boundary of your home. And by extension, the strongest statement about your self-worth. And maybe that's the real question underneath all of this. Not how your front door works, but whether the version of you who walks through it each day feels supported or silently disoriented by design that doesn't yet match your inner direction. 3. Light. The first messenger of Qi darkness isn't always about the absence of light. Sometimes it's about the absence of clarity. And clarity, as it turns out, often begins right at your front door. The moment you approach a home, even before you knock, even before you touch the handle, your body begins to read the signals. One of the first signals it notices is light. Is the path lit? Is the doorway glowing with softness and welcome? Or is it covered in shadow with a sense of stillness that feels more like stagnation? What many people don't realize is that light doesn't just illuminate, it informs. It tells the energy around you what is allowed to enter. And when your entrance is dim, shadowed, or carelessly lit, it quietly signals to opportunity, inspiration, and abundance. Not now, not here. In Feng Shui, light is not decoration, it is declaration. It represents yang energy, dynamic, expansive, life-affirming. The kind of energy that invites growth, supports vision, and allows circulation not just of air, but of ideas, money, and meaningful movement. A bright, intentionally lit entryway sets the tone for everything that follows. It tells your guests, both seen and unseen, that this space is awake, alert, and open. But more importantly, it tells you that you're walking into a space that's capable of receiving the next chapter of your life. A dark doorway, on the other hand, often reinforces a belief that you're not ready for more, or worse, that you've stopped expecting more to arrive. What's interesting is how often people overlook this. They spend time choosing furniture or painting walls inside, but never stop to consider how they feel every time they return home in the evening and are met by shadows. That moment, stepping through an unlit or dimly lit entrance, is not just a logistical inconvenience. It's a symbolic message that the space is not fully inhabited, that energy has dimmed, that maybe, just maybe, the person who lives there is dimming too. Not deliberately, just gradually, just subtly enough to not question it. And this is where the quiet erosion of vitality often begins, not from one major disruption, but from these small, persistent signals that say, we're not quite alive here, we're just functioning. But light is incredibly responsive. You don't need a major renovation to shift the tone of your entryway. What you need is intentionality, a warm light fixture, a soft glow that wraps around the threshold instead of flooding it, a motion-activated lamp for guests who arrive after dark, a single string of amber-tone bulbs tucked beneath the eaves that says, "This place matters." These aren't design tricks, they are invitations for life, connection, and presence to walk through your front door and feel like they belong. From a symbolic standpoint, light is not just brightness, it is consciousness, it is attention. A darkened entrance reflects areas in life where we've grown numb, where patterns repeat without renewal, where routines become rigid and the sense of wonder fades. That's why a neglected entry light so often parallels periods of stagnation, financial droughts, emotional burnout, creative blocks, because the message is energetic, not aesthetic. And unless it's corrected, it loops silently in the background. This space is sleeping. But perhaps the more difficult question is this: when did darkness become your default? At what point did it stop feeling strange to come home to a doorway that doesn't greet you? At what point did it start to feel normal to fumble with keys in silence, or to walk through a space that doesn't brighten in your presence? These aren't just habits, they're clues. Clues that somewhere along the way, you've allowed the first messenger of qi to be dimmed. And if that messenger is silenced, how many other parts of your life are also waiting in the shadows? That's why in Feng Shui, the recommendation isn't just to light the door, but to let the light be a metaphor for how you meet the world. Not aggressively, not artificially, but with softness and constancy, like a lighthouse rather than a spotlight. Because a home that invites light invites possibility. And a life that begins each day by walking through an illuminated threshold is already ahead, because it's beginning with awareness. Let the doorway glow, not to impress anyone else, but to remind yourself that you are home, that you are ready, and that light still belongs in your story. Because no matter how simple the change, when light returns to the entrance, movement returns to your energy. And slowly, without drama, the parts of you that felt forgotten begin to stir again. Not all at once, but just enough to remember what it feels like to walk through a door and think, something good lives here. 4. Scent, the invisible greeter. Before you even step inside, your body already knows how the space feels through scent. It happens quietly, without permission, and often without conscious awareness. Your nose catches a trace of something, floral, stale, woody, chemical, musty, and your nervous system responds before you've even reached the light switch. This moment is subtle, but it's powerful, because in Feng Shui and in the science of the senses, scent isn't background, it's emotional architecture. It sets the tone not just for how a space smells, but for how it's experienced. And your front door, your very threshold, is where this entire energetic impression begins. Of all the senses, smell is the only one that bypasses logic. It doesn't pass through language or analysis. It goes straight to memory, straight to feeling, straight to instinct. That's why a scent from childhood can transport you decades back in a flash, or why an unpleasant smell can make your whole body tense, even if you don't realize why. The same applies at home. A doorway that smells musty, sour, or neglected tells the body, something's not right here. And even if the space is clean, bright, or decorated, that initial scent stays embedded in the emotional atmosphere. So what happens when the scent that greets you daily is neutral at best or unpleasant at worst? Over time, it accumulates as a quiet stressor. You may not consciously name it, but your nervous system absorbs it. A lingering smell of old shoes, cooking grease, damp air, or cigarette residue becomes a low-level background noise in your experience of home. It dulls the feeling of safety. It blocks the sense of invitation. It numbs the delight of returning, and slowly the space starts to feel heavier. Not because something big is wrong, but because the entry no longer breathes. But scent, unlike architecture or structure, is incredibly responsive. It changes immediately with intention. That's where Feng Shui becomes practical again. Not mystical, but manageable. The scent at your entrance is not a luxury. It's emotional programming, and it's your threshold. Just as a kind voice softens a conversation, a welcoming scent softens the transition between the outer world and your private one. And what's remarkable is how little it takes. A bowl of baking soda tucked behind a plant, a diffuser with a few drops of orange, cedarwood, or lavender, a sachet of dried citrus peel and cinnamon tied discreetly to the handle. These aren't decorations. They are energetic signals, silently telling both you and the space, this home is cared for. The deeper truth is that scent carries emotional memory. It tells you what the space values, what it prioritizes. A home that smells fresh at the entrance invites clarity, calm, and openness. A home that carries the smells of stress or clutter says the opposite. So the question becomes, does your home greet you the way you want to be greeted? Or has it gone silent in that greeting, offering no warmth, no emotional handshake, no signal that this is a space that belongs to joy? And here's where the thinking may need to shift. Many assume scent is about impressing guests, but what if the real reason to Moss is to reprogram your own body's response to home? What if you could walk in and immediately feel your breath slow, your shoulders drop, your energy soften, not because of something visible, but because of what you inhale in the first few seconds? That's not marketing, that's design. Design of experience, design of mood, design of daily transition. Because scent, unlike objects, leaves no clutter. It carries no weight, but its impact is lasting. A well-scented entry can calm the system before words are spoken, before shoes come off, before the lights are even turned on. That's the power of the invisible greeter. It shows up before everything else, and yet often gets noticed last, until now. So reflect on what greets you, not in form, but in feeling. When the door opens, what fills the air? Is it renewal or residue? Is it invitation or avoidance? Because what meets you in the air becomes what stays with you in the body. And once scent becomes intentional, once it's chosen to match the mood you want to live in, your entire relationship with coming home begins to change. Not from a grand gesture, but from a quiet shift. One you feel before you even know why. Vital energy, the invisible lifeblood. You can feel it when a home is alive and when it's not. You don't need to see the furniture or hear the music to know. There's a kind of stillness that nurtures and a kind of stillness that suffocates. And what determines the difference often isn't color schemes or luxury. It's the invisible current that either flows or stagnates through the space. In Feng Shui, this is known as vital energy, the lifeblood of the home. And unlike decoration, it can't be bought. Because energy doesn't come from what you add, it comes from how you care. Many people fall into the trap of buying beauty without tending to the basics. They hang wind chimes, arrange crystals, or place statues by the door, but forget to clean the dust that collects right beside them. And the message that sends, consciously or not, is, I'm performing intention, not living it. You can spend $500 on sacred objects, but if the entryway is stale, neglected, or chaotic, that energy speaks louder than any charm ever could. Vital energy isn't about what you place, it's about what you practice. One viewer once shared that for 2 weeks, she made one simple decision: to treat her front entrance as sacred. No purchases, no rituals, just daily care. Each morning she wiped the doorknob, she swept the dust, she watered one single potted plant, and offered a quiet moment of breath before stepping outside. By week 3, she didn't just notice a cleaner doorstep, she noticed deeper sleep, fewer arguments at home, and an unexpected job opportunity that just showed up. Was it coincidence? Or was it that her energy field had finally stopped blocking what it secretly wanted to receive? That's the quiet truth of energy. When it flows freely at your entrance, it tends to ripple inward. You may not feel it on day 1, but you feel it in the way you speak to others, in the way you walk into your kitchen, in the way your body exerts less effort to feel safe. Because when the entry breathes, the home exhales. And when the home exhales, the people inside it start to feel more like themselves again. Not more productive, not more perfect, just less weighed down. But what blocks this vital energy more than anything is unconscious neglect. Forgotten shoes, broken umbrellas, piles of packages, a sticky doorknob. All of it tells your space, I'll tend to you later. But later becomes a habit. And the space, once a partner in your growth, becomes passive, silent, disengaged. That's when the home starts to feel heavy. Not haunted, but half awake. Yet the solution is never to add more things. It's to return to presence. Wipe the handle, sweep the step. Add one living plant and water it like it matters, not because it's symbolic, but because it's alive. Place a bowl of salt behind the door, not because salt is magic, but because you were intentional enough to place it with purpose. Energy responds as sincerity, not superstition. When a front entrance is truly alive, it doesn't need to prove anything. There's a kind of quiet welcome that flows from a well-cared-for space. A sense that this is not just where someone lives, but where someone shows up. And that presence, subtle, consistent, undramatic, is often the very thing that reawakens flow. Not just of money or luck, but of clarity, focus, lightness. So the deeper question isn't, what do I need to buy to fix my entryway? It's, am I treating this space as a reflection of who I am becoming, or as an afterthought? Because a space can only mirror what you consistently express. And if what you express is care, attention, and intention, then what the space reflects will be momentum, protection, and peace. That's the nature of vital energy. It doesn't shout, it doesn't show off, it simply stays where it's respected. And that respect begins with the simplest, most overlooked actions, done not for performance, but for alignment. Because your home isn't asking for more, it's asking for meaning. Six, the threshold or three-step entry, the energetic filter. Without a boundary, everything spills, including your peace. That's what many people forget in the modern home, where speed is prioritized, where convenience overrides intention, and where the space between out there and in here is often nothing more than a flat doorway crossed in a blur. Yet in a traditional architecture, whether in temples, tea houses, or humble family homes, there was always something else, a threshold, a single step, a stone ledge, a deliberate pause before entering. And that pause wasn't just about structure, it was about energy. It marked the moment where you were invited, sometimes even required, to leave something behind. In Feng Shui, the threshold is more than just a transitional line. It's an energetic filter, It is the place where outer chaos is asked to stop and inner clarity begins. It is not a physical wall. It is a soft boundary that gives your body and your mind a chance to realign. And what's remarkable is how deeply intuitive this is. Think about the last time you stepped into a home and felt an immediate shift even before you spoke a word. Maybe the air felt calmer. Maybe your breath slowed. Maybe it felt like a place where noise wasn't allowed to follow. That's not coincidence. That's design rooted in consciousness. The threshold traditionally was never flush with the ground. It always created a moment of lift, not to block people, but to slow energy, to signal transition. In that lift, be it a step, a mat, or a raised edge, there was a subtle invitation. Let this next step be intentional. And in a world that rarely gives us those moments, that single pause is powerful. Because when you don't pause at the threshold, everything rushes in with you. Your stress, your obligations, your phone notifications, your unfinished conversations. But the beauty of Feng Shui is that it adapts to the present. You don't need a 3-step marble entrance to reclaim the threshold. A simple welcome mat, a raised stone tile, a line of decorative pebbles, even a visual cue like a subtle shift in flooring can signal the same thing. This is the space where you come back to yourself. The key isn't grandeur, it's mindfulness. It's the subtle act of separating the external from the internal, not in walls, but in awareness. What makes this especially relevant is what we now understand about the nervous system. Psychologists and trauma researchers agree that even brief, consistent rituals at points of transition help regulate stress, restore presence, and create mental safety. That means the act of pausing for just a few seconds before crossing your threshold isn't decorative, it's restorative. When you stand and say silently, "I leave what's not mine out here," you're not performing, you're choosing. Choosing not to carry every burden into the one place meant to hold your rest. But here's the deeper question. What happens when there's no boundary at all? When the same energy from the street, the meeting, the news, the traffic, all of it, slides into your home without resistance. The result isn't dramatic, but it's cumulative. Over time, the space begins to feel heavier, louder, less able to hold peace. Not because something is wrong inside, but because nothing filtered what came in from outside. That's the gift of the threshold. It's a small, silent guardian. It doesn't block the world. It simply asks you to consider what you're bringing with you. It gives you a chance to choose. Do I need to carry this into the next moment? Or can I set it down right here and come back to it later, if it's even still worth carrying at all? And the most elegant part is this: once the body learns that your threshold is a place of pause, it will respond without effort. Your breath will shift, your pace will slow, and the space itself will begin to feel sacred, not in a mystical sense, but in a human one. Because boundaries at their best don't restrict, they protect. They give shape to the kind of life you're trying to build. So while it may seem like a small detail, a rug, a step, a whispered phrase, that single moment of awareness at the entrance may be the one thing standing between a home that feels like a sanctuary and a space that feels like a hallway. And when your threshold becomes intentional, the rest of your home follows. Not because you made it perfect, but because you made it yours. 7. The middle door. The subtle guardian. If your front door is a welcome sign, then the middle door is your energetic security system. It's the quiet gatekeeper that most people overlook. In many modern homes, the design flows openly, straight from entrance to living room or front door to back window, with little pause or protection in between. But what seems like a sleek, open concept in architectural terms often becomes, in energetic terms, an unfiltered rush. When energy blasts through a house without resistance, it doesn't settle, it escapes. And what escapes isn't just airflow, it's intention, attention, fortune, and focus. The middle door isn't always an actual door. It can be a divider, a sheer curtain, a sliding panel, or even a thoughtfully placed piece of furniture that signals a shift between external and internal. Its purpose is not to block, but to buffer. It's a soft layer between the noise and the calm, the public and the personal. And without it, the space loses its ability to hold energy. It becomes a tunnel rather than a sanctuary. The sensation may not be obvious at first, but over time you might notice it in subtle ways. Restlessness in common areas, difficulty concentrating, a sense that the home never truly settles. That's not bad design, it's energy with nowhere to land. What's often misunderstood is that openness doesn't automatically equal spaciousness. A space without boundaries can feel more exposed than expanded. That's where the middle door becomes essential, not as a barrier, but as a breath. A pause in the flow that lets energy catch up with itself before it spills too far. It invites the home to breathe more naturally. It offers the chi a moment to soften, slow, and integrate before moving deeper into the heart of the space. This is especially crucial in layouts where the front door opens directly into high-use zones, living rooms, staircases, kitchens, or sliding glass exits. In these cases, energy enters fast and leaves faster. Without interruption, you may find yourself constantly feeling like things slip away too quickly. Time, money, clarity, even rest. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because your home isn't holding what it receives. There's no subtle guardian to steady the flow. Design-wise, the options are deeply flexible, and the most effective solutions are often the most understated. Frosted glass creates privacy without darkness. Wooden slats offer rhythm and texture without bulk. A curtain in a muted tone can soften the atmosphere and lend a gentle visual shift, even in compact apartments. What matters is not opacity, it's intention. The middle layer should feel like an inhale, not a wall, not a stop sign, but a soft suggestion to slow down. And it's precisely in that slowing down that energy becomes usable, nourishing, and steady. The key question isn't whether you have a middle door, but whether your home has a moment of transition, a chance to cross from one kind of presence into another, from the external to the internal, from noise to nourishment. And if that transition doesn't exist in structure, it must be created in design, because the mind and the body respond to cues. And a home without that cue becomes a place where everything overlaps, thoughts, moods, conversations, tensions, until nothing feels truly yours. This is where Feng Shui aligns with modern psychology. Therapists speak of transition rituals as a way to protect emotional boundaries, small, repeated actions that help the brain switch gears. In homes, the middle door becomes that ritual, embedded in space, a silent reminder that you have entered a new state of being, that it's okay to drop what doesn't belong in the next room, that not everything needs to pass through unchanged. And perhaps that's the larger message of this space. It's not about shutting the world out, it's about choosing how it enters. Because when energy is received gently, it stays longer, it supports more, it nourishes rather than overwhelms. And in a home where that gentle pause exists, people tend to feel more settled, more supported, more in control, not because the house is large or new, but because the energy knows how to move and when to rest. So if you've ever felt like things come in too fast and leave too soon, whether that's ideas, luck, visitors, or even your own peace of mind, it may not be the pace of life that's the problem. It may be the absence of a threshold within the threshold. The missing middle, the part of the home that reminds everything, slow down, take a breath and come in with care. Because how something enters is often how it stays. And when your home learns to receive gently, it begins to hold energy in a way that transforms not just how it looks, but how it feels. Final. It's not decoration, it's declaration. The truth is, most people don't realize how much their home is speaking until something in their life starts feeling stuck. And more often than not, the signs were there all along. A front door barely used, a dim entrance walked through on autopilot, a threshold with no pause, or a space that smells of yesterday's stress more than today's intention. These aren't just oversights. They are silent patterns, repeated in home after home, that quietly shape how people feel, how they think, and how much they're really letting in. Not just letting in physically, but emotionally, spiritually, energetically, because Feng Shui isn't about pretty spaces. It's about present ones. It's about choosing what kind of energy you let into your life before it ever reaches your calendar, your wallet, or your relationships. And where that energy first meets you is your front door. If that door is misaligned, neglected, or surrounded by chaos, it sets the tone for everything that follows. If it's blocked, fortune gets blocked. If it's dim, clarity dims. If it's uncared for, life mirrors that lack of care back to you in 1,000 tiny ways you may not even recognize until something inside you starts asking, why do I feel so disconnected from my own space? And the answer may not be hidden deep in complexity. It may simply be waiting at your threshold. Because a well-aligned front door doesn't just look different, it feels different. It feels intentional. It feels clean. It feels open to receiving. Let's step back and reflect on the spaces we've walked through in this journey, because they have all led back to one truth. Your home responds to the way you treat it, not with superstition, but with reflection. When you name your home, you give it identity. When you strengthen your door, you give it structure. When you light the entrance, you invite clarity. When you freshen the air, you soothe your nervous system. When you care for the space, not decorate but truly care, you invite life to do the same for you. These are not abstract rituals. They are emotional architecture, and they matter. Most people make the same few mistakes, not out of ignorance but out of habit. They treat their home like storage instead of sanctuary. They rush through the threshold without letting the energy settle. They open the door physically, but close it energetically. They rely on objects to do the work that only presence can accomplish. And what happens? They all feel the same symptoms: low energy, stagnant luck, emotional burnout, or a home that looks fine but never quite feels like a safe landing. That's not personal failure. It's a shared blind spot. But here's the shift that changes everything. When you approach your home as a reflection of your readiness, not your perfection, not your status, but your readiness, you start to live in alignment rather than resistance. And it starts with the smallest steps. Place a bowl of salt, add a light. Name your home, not because these things are magical on their own, but because they represent a deeper truth. This is a space where good things happen. And when your home hears that message enough times, it starts to believe it. And when you believe it, the space and the life you're building begin to move together, not in chaos, but in quiet, sustainable harmony.